Okay, hi everybody. I'm Lowinger. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work in the 5 towns and in Manhattan. I'm just going to get started because there's a lot to cover. They'll come in with the chairs. We'll just kind of ignore them and keep going. Okay, so first of all, I just wanted to have a show of hands in the room, if I could, of how many of you have been engaged in a caregiving sort of parasha for a long time. Okay, so a lot of people in the room. And how many of you are more new to this whole concept, are dealing with a new diagnosis, a new paradigm shift where life is changing just about now when you're trying to understand what you're supposed to expect for the next little while? Okay, so a little bit less. Because there's really a little bit of different kinds of challenges, and I guess most of you in the room are more dealing with the long-term cumulative effects of caregiving, which are a little bit different than that first traumatic kind of new realization that life is about to change and there's a lot of resources that you have to mobilize to start coping with it. But first of all, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for rising to the occasion of taking care of another person. That's a huge thing, so I'm very honored to be with you here. And what I'm going to try to do is sort of do a little bit of talking and then a little bit of participation from everybody. We'll try to go over some common feelings that people tend to have, some coping strategies, and also some internal conflicts that you may have come across or that you're coming across. And the interesting thing about that is that a lot of the times those will also translate then into interpersonal conflicts. So you'll see some of your internal conflicts being then, interestingly enough, played out with another person, and to kind of make those connections. But a lot of what we're going to talk about is really going to depend on you, on what's on your mind, on what's interesting to you, because there's so much to talk about. There's no way we're going to get through all of it. So the first thing I wanted to do is, if everybody can take a second and just write down on the piece of paper in front of you the first feeling that comes to mind when you think of yourself as a caregiver. And it can really just be a one-word association that comes to you to mind, a feeling that comes to mind when you think of yourself as a caregiver. And then we're going to go around the room. This is not a test. There's no right and wrong answers. They're all right. Here. Oh, do you have? Okay. And you can also say your name when we go around. Just your name and one feeling that comes to mind. Okay, everybody ready? We'll start with you because you seem calm about it.
Because I'm not actually a caregiver per se. I represent a program where we give caregiver support.
Okay.
So what I find is that people come to us because they are overwhelmed.
Yes. Okay. So that's what you would represent on their behalf.
Exactly.
Okay. What's your name, by the way?
Irina.
Okay.
My name is Tila, and responsibility?
Responsibility, sure. Okay.
Benji, responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, a merit. Yeah, sure, a privilege, an opportunity, a positive opportunity.
I was going to say responsibility, but since everybody else did, I'll say sometimes overwhelmed.
Sure.
I put down impatient because sometimes I don't know what's the matter with me, but I'm so impatient sometimes. I don't know.
Right. And that probably associates a little bit with frustration, annoyance, impatience, all of these kind of words come to mind. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Overwhelmed.
The last row, they should be bringing
Overwhelmed is a big one. Okay. Yeah. Stress, sure. Scared. I think we stopped just about here in the middle, so let's pick up.
The right word is torn and overwhelmed.
Torn. Torn between
Parents, children.
responsibilities. Yeah.
I'm fed up.
So angry.
Right?
Yeah.
Smothering.
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 You feel smothered, or you
Yes.
feel that you are smothered?
No, that I'm being smothered by the overwhelming responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, you can't go out, you can't leave them, you know.
Yeah. Sure.
Overwhelmed for sure, but I'm always busy.
Always busy.
Always busy. I just like, don't have time for myself.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not the main caregiver, but sometimes just helpless to be able to help.
Helpless. Yeah.
We use those chairs that.
Yeah, sure, of course. That's fine.
Five more shares.
Nobody's joining and giving this workshop, so you can totally have them. And there's one more here, if somebody wants to grab it. Okay. What else? Who else have we skipped? Sir?
Tired.
Tired? And behind over there, leaning on the wall? You? Yeah.
Frustrated.
Frustrated.
I wish I could be the caregiver.
You wish you could be the
My
caregiver.
father's married to a woman who's not my mother, and she's doing a bad job.
So you feel locked out.
I am locked out.
Yeah. Which is also obviously leading you to feeling angry and frustrated and all of those. Yes.
Say sounds. Sounds a little bit helpless.
Helpless.
Listen, I enjoy taking care of my mother.
So you take pride.
She has a caretaker, but I go there and I do whatever I could.
Which is important really when we go around the room and when you look at this handout, that there are also some positive emotions that come along with this, despite how hard and difficult it is. So I'm glad that we're getting a little bit of a representation of that as well. Yeah? Sure.
Torn and just being pulled in all directions.
Yes. Sir?
I would like to be more supportive
More supportive.
of the primary caregiver.
Okay, great.
I am the primary caregiver, and I'm scared.
Scared. Okay. So this is what we're going to try to do. I want to talk a little bit about the feelings, and then we'll talk a little bit about coping, because a lot of you are expressing the feeling of being overwhelmed, of being constantly busy, and how to carve out some personal space, how to delegate, to elicit support from other people, to mobilize support, to mobilize resources for yourself. So it sounds like that might be something good for us to talk about, because a lot of people in the room seem to be at that point, and it makes sense that you are, because if you've been doing this for a while, then you have already come to understand that it's not like for 2 or 3 weeks you're going to give it your all and then it's going to go away. It's really a marathon. It's a long-term commitment, and it has to be sustainable. It can't just be a spurt of energy and then what? So we're going to talk a little bit about long-term coping strategies. Then something that comes up from a few of you is wanting to be more involved, and how do you sort of enter into the caregiving situation more? What can you do about that? And also about just feelings like being scared, like being anxious, right? I just want to get a feeling from people in the room now. Given the emotion that you talked about, how many of you feel that emotion helps you cope? And let's see how many of you feel that the emotion that you just told me about helps you cope? Feeling that it's a privilege helps? Yeah.
I said I was scared, but I'm scared that I'm doing the right thing. Like sometimes I'm like second guessing myself, but fortunately I have a support system in place.
Right. So you feel that being in that place of uncertainty also motivates you to do more, and that energizes you as well.
Yes.
So most of you feel that being overwhelmed and feeling all these emotions is really counterproductive, as far as I can gather. Yes? Okay. So, all right. So we're going to dedicate some time to then thinking on how to work with that feeling of being overwhelmed and how to diffuse the tension a little bit. Another thing that I wanted to cover that didn't come up much, but I do think that it's probably relevant to a lot of people, is feeling ambivalent, okay? Most people who are involved in caregiving at one point or another feel ambivalent. Like you said, you feel impatient and you say, I don't know what's wrong with me, right? So right there's that. So ambivalence is something that we all have to deal with, right? From teenage and on, we have to come to terms with our parents. We realize we love our parents to death, but they also annoy us, and maybe we even hate them sometimes. And we have to be able to live with both of these feelings and be okay with them. And I think that gets amplified when you're in a caregiving situation, because on one hand, you know you're doing all the right things, or you're trying to do all the right things. You're trying to be caring, to be loving, to be nurturing, and at the same time, you're feeling resentful, you're feeling angry, you're feeling impatient. And what do you do with that? Do you beat yourself up for that? Do you say, I don't know what's wrong with me? Or do you sort of accept that as part of the human condition, that that's what you're supposed to be feeling, that you're actually where most other people in your situation find themselves, which is that you're feeling opposing feelings, and that's fine. And the other thing I think is that a lot of people tend to think, if I'm impatient, that invalidates whatever good I am doing. Or if I'm doing it out of duty and not out of complete dedication, then somehow it's not as worthwhile. So I think that that's a fallacy, and that's something that also can hold us back. That these feelings are not exclusive, that just because you're impatient doesn't mean you don't love your parents, or just because you're doing it out of duty doesn't mean that whatever you're doing is not meaningful, helpful. Okay, does that resonate with people in the room, this feeling of kind of ambivalence and feeling like there's a lot of contradictory feelings happening all at the same time?
I think people may have a tendency, I can't speak for anybody but myself, but a tendency to beat yourself up when it's not perfect.
Right.
I mean, you have this ideal that you're going to care for your loved one, and it's going to be, you know, everything that you had ever dreamed, and then you're up against the challenges constantly, you know, or daily, and you want a day to go by where it doesn't get tense, where you don't lose your cool, where you're not losing control, where you're not feeling angry. You want one day of that to happen, and then there's this question of, you know, in your own self-esteem, you know, how come I can't get through a day without reacting, without feeling badly? And the only support I get is in support groups when I hear that other people are going through the same thing. Otherwise, I tend to be pretty hard on myself.
Right. So I guess what you're saying is that when you do talk to other people, you realize that the standard is of ups and downs. The standard, what you can expect or look forward to in the best case scenario, is to have some failures and some successes, and that having these kind of unrealistic expectations for like a super caregiver are actually kind of an impediment, because at the end of the day you end up just not feeling good about what you're doing, and that's not particularly motivating. That kind of makes you feel like you're failing, so why even bother, or why even try? So that's important.
Is it possible to close the door?
Yeah, we can totally close the door now. I think everybody's in. Do you ladies mind if we just move the chairs a little bit in so we can close the door? So striving for perfection is something that people in the room feel is a bit of a problem.
No, it's okay. He's bringing another chair. Thanks.
What about resentment? How do people feel about that feeling? Is that something that comes up where you kind of feel resentful, angry for being in the situation, angry for how do you people deal with that? Yes.
As a child with other siblings, and being a caretaker, parents, I really found that I had to numb myself. That I'm the only one, and I want to give my parents the utmost respect. So I just have to tell myself that it's harder not to do than to do. You know what I mean to say? So that's how I was able to cope with it, and just go ahead and do what I have to do. And I never wanted my parents to feel like that they don't that they're not getting the utmost attention. You know what I mean?
So what do you mean by numbing yourself?
Numbing my feelings of resentment, of thinking, why should, you know, like, it's easier for me to do it than to wait for somebody else to come and do it.
She's talking about
Resentment towards siblings. And does that has worked for you? Okay. Okay. So from my personal experience, but everybody carves their own path, and if it works, then keep doing it. From my personal experience in my practice, what I tend to see is that people, you know, Freud thought about it like a hydraulic system with water, that if there's pressure of water building up in your pipes and one pipe is clogged and it can't get through, then it will find a way and it will burst through. So I'll just give you a very quick vignette of an experience I had with a patient who was a caregiver to a parent who became ill actually very young. So it was like an early onset type of situation. She was totally not prepared. This was not what she signed up for at all. And she was an exemplary caregiver. She was very attentive, very conscientious, very good to her mother. What she came into me for was these outbursts that seem unreasonable of anger that she would have towards her husband, who was a sweetheart. He really was very supportive, very mild. He actually came in, so I could tell he was very soft-spoken, very supportive. And when she had these outbursts, he just kind of smoothed it over, didn't make a big deal, but she felt bad about it. She felt like it wasn't right. And it took us a very long time because it was very hard for her to accept the fact that she was angry. She was angry with God for putting her in the situation, but she couldn't really go to a rabbi and say, hey, I'm angry with God now, because that doesn't seem to be something you go discuss with your rabbi. And she was angry with her mother, but how can you possibly be angry with a person who is not well? I mean, they didn't choose this, so that wouldn't be fair. She was very frustrated. So the way it came out in this hydraulic system, it came out on the poor husband, who really didn't deserve this and was very supportive. And it's hard to kind of own these feelings, and if you can ignore them, then you're very blessed. But most people who have this inner anxiety, eventually it ends up sort of spilling over into something or somewhere. So what I want to say about anger is that anger is actually not such a bad thing, okay? And we can work with anger. We can actually work with most of these negative feelings. And I'll give you some examples, and I'm not saying it's easy, but anger is actually an energizing feeling, okay? You feel empowered. You feel like, I'm going to go and I'm going to show them and I'm going to, okay? You're feeling your adrenaline is pumping. You're ready to go do something. And that's actually better than apathy, and it's better than feeling drained and tired and out of it. So an example of a patient I had was that they were very frustrated about the medical establishment and how doctors were communicating and whatever it is, and eventually this person ended up being an advocate for people, okay? And they ended up being very helpful, actually, because they created a whole support system for other people. Another way that you can use these feelings is really to try to empathize with your loved one. When you feel that frustration bubbling up, if you really take a second to think about it, you can empathize with how frustrated they must be. And I use that in therapy all the time. Sometimes the patient is clearly doing something destructive. They won't change. I'm getting so frustrated. And then I realize this is probably how frustrated they are with themselves, because they can't change this thing and they're self-destructive and it's terrible for them. So what you can do with that then is that when your loved one is frustrated and is having a fit, and you feel like just kind of in a patronizing way say, oh, come on, you know, it's not so bad, or I'll do it for you, don't worry about it, you can then go back to that anger that you've been feeling, and you can use it, and you can say, you know, this is really frustrating. I really know how you feel. And for it to not come from a patronizing place, but really from a camaraderie, from this is something that we're both experiencing. I really understand where you're coming from. When you're angry like that, you might also go out and maybe have an outburst or open up to somebody that you didn't mean to, because I'm so frustrated and I'm fed up and I just want to say it to the first person I see. But what can come out of that is that you might enlist more support for yourself, okay? People can see that can see that call for help, and they may rise up to the occasion, and they may offer you something for that. Maybe it's a support group, maybe it's an email list, maybe it's an idea that comes out of it to meet as a family once a week and talk about what's going on. If you're a long-distance caregiver, then that might end up being the kind of support you can give to the primary caregiver who is in the front lines. So what I'm trying to say is if you can numb the feelings and get past them, that's fine. But if you can't, then just kind of becoming a little bit more aware and trying to think how you can work with the feelings can also be useful.
How do you handle help when you ask for help or people give help? Most of the time people give help what they want to do, and it's very destructive for you. How do you go about it? It should be a pleasant way on the two sides of the people that want to help people. They want to do it their way and when they want it.
Right.
And it comes out many times that you say no thank you, and you don't take your help, and they're busy that you're overworked because you're not taking the help. They want to do the help the way they want it,
right.
When they want it, and how they want to do it. But for instance, my husband cannot be in shul only for like an hour and a half or something Friday night. It's too exhausting for him, so we should have the Suda. And the family would love him to go to the shul. That's 2.5 hours of davening, right? And then they say, well, you're not taking our help, and you don't want to help, and you're fighting with us, and blah, 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 blah. Now, I have to be very strong because I have to do what's good for my husband, not for myself.
Right.
And it's constantly a conflict. So everybody has a finger, well, you are fighting, and you're not taking help, and you're collapsing with your hand, and you complain, it's all your fault.
Yeah, right.
How do you handle it?
So that's and I think that applies to a lot of people in the room, because a lot of people brought out this idea of feeling overwhelmed, which I think one of the solutions for the feeling of being overwhelmed is to mobilize resources, to enlist resources and then to use them. So there's two parts to your question. I'm sorry, what was your name?
Helen Wasserman.
Helen. There's two parts to the question, okay? And it goes something like this. One part of it has to do with how do we organize, mobilize resources that we have. How do we create family meetings on a regular basis, or a discussion group, or even an online calendar where all the requests are listed and people fill in whatever requests whether it's grocery shopping or a visit or sitting for 2 hours when you need to go out, okay? So that's something, this is very practical, but it's something that I've seen.
Meetings?
There's
Who should organize it?
Well, you could be the initiator because you're the primary caregiver, okay? But I've seen this done beautifully where you have an online calendar. People get the password for it, and you write in 5 things that are needed every day, okay? So let's say 2 hours of visiting in the morning, groceries, and maybe a visit in the afternoon, and somebody to sit for an hour, whatever the needs are, okay? And it's in red. And people, you write an email to all the people that are close to you that you think might be interested, and you give the password for this calendar, and people sign in, they see what's available in red, and they sign up. They don't need to talk to you. You don't need to invest any extra time beyond just setting this up, okay? And once they fill in that request, it goes green. So then other people know that that's already taken, it's no longer needed, and they choose something else. Okay, so there's a lot of ways. This is just one way. If you're not calendar savvy, whatever, you can do this in email, you can do this by text, you can do this in person. The point is that you want to set up a system where you communicate with people in the family, you create a list of the needs, and you sort of delegate who is going to do what.
That's considering people are volunteering to help.
That's considering that people are willing to help. Right, correct. Usually there will be some people who are willing to help, even if it's not in the immediate family. You see, the other part of it is we have people here who want to help, and they feel like they're being locked out of the help. So I think a lot of the time what's missing is the communication, okay? That some people feel like they want to help and they don't know how, and they don't have an in, and other people feel overwhelmed and they don't know how to delegate and how to kind of include other people in the caregiving. So that's the task at hand, is to start to facilitate the communication. And I don't know how you communicate with your families, but this can be, do people text, like a text group where you can put 10 people on the text group and say, hey, we want to call a family meeting. Daddy's situation is getting harder, and we really need to kind of see who can do what, because, yeah, go ahead.
So we have a WhatsApp group. Amongst a bunch of brothers. We send out a message. My father needed a haircut on Thursday. He's living with us. And Thursday happened to be a legal holiday.
Right.
Many people in
Right.
the room, but,
Right.
All right, so when my brother was off, he said, I can take him in the afternoon.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Constant communication. Sometimes it's over the top because people start joking about it. But usually,
Right.
When you need something, it gets taken care of.
Do people kind of do family meetings, like let's say every couple of months, where the main players, the siblings, and maybe their children, most of your children, I'm assuming, are already adults who can also pitch in, meet together and discuss, this is what's going on with mom, this is what I am faced with in terms of the tasks, who can help, who's not working. I mean, do people do this? Do people meet with a family and sort of try to delegate who does and who doesn't?
I have a sibling who doesn't care what I'm going through.
Okay.
So we're totally alienated, and basically says if you're overwhelmed, you better hire an aide or I'll hire one.
Okay, so they are offering financial aid. How is that?
To hire a personal home health aide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that would work if my mother wanted a home health aide, but she doesn't.
Okay, so now we're going to get to the second part of the question, but first I'm going to let you speak.
It might be the second part that I think you're dealing with in a lot of situations. I think we're not unique, where some siblings understand what it means to help, and other siblings are just clueless. So like my brother thinks he should come for shops with the 5 kids, and that would be good for my parents, and little kids. And that'll be really good for my mother who's in a wheelchair, because she'll spend time with the grandchildren and feels like...
So is there communication there where all the siblings sit and there's kind of an evaluation, look, this is what mom is at right now. She can no longer cook, so Shabbos cooking has to be done by whoever comes. I mean, is there
when we try to say, well, it's overwhelming for her to have little kids running around for a couple of hours, and from his perspective, it's a 2-hour trip for him to come visit,
Yeah.
so he doesn't really want to come for a half hour at a
Yeah.
time. But you try to explain that maybe he should come by himself sometimes, and
Yeah.
spend some time with
Yeah.
them. And it's like you're talking 2 different languages. I think this is the same thing with this woman saying with her sister, which is that it's fine to say this is a solution, but her mother's not accepting. It's not a solution for her particular case,
Right.
because it won't work for her mother.
Right.
And so, I mean, I think that the problem is that you have, I think a lot of people have people who are intimately involved, and then other people who their offers of assistance are really pretty useless, and then they say, well, you don't want my help anyway. So I think that's the conflict. It's that I don't think it's that her sister doesn't care. I think it's that her sister is offering assistance that's not really useful.
Right. So in those cases, what really needs to happen is that there needs to be, this can't be like a 2-minute conversation on the phone or a text. There needs to be a family meeting, and sometimes maybe even a therapist or a counselor or a professional who is involved with the care of the person, who knows what they can and can't do. So sometimes it could be even a neurologist, and you meet in the neurologist office, because some people need a reality check. They still think that the person can go shopping. Meanwhile, that person would get lost if they went shopping. So they're not necessarily aware of the condition. And then this meeting has to happen with some kind of mediation, where everybody sort of understands what the needs are. This is really what needs to be clear. These are the needs, and who can step up and fill in any one of these needs. And the primary caregiver obviously is more attuned to what the needs are, because they're there on a daily basis, so they're in a better position. But maybe a professional can also help in identifying these needs. Yes?
My sister lives in Israel. She comes in Pesach. We met with the neurologist, with my father's wife, and the doctor to her face said, your husband can't drive.
Mm-hmm.
And she to date encourages him to drive, thinking that it stimulates his mind, which means that she's putting everyone on the road in danger physically and herself. We had this meeting with the mediator, and she's doing exactly the opposite of what she was told.
And this is, your sister lives in Israel, and your parent is also in Israel.
No,
so
my father's here in America, and he's married to a woman who's not my mother, who is encouraging him to murder people.
The doctor can take away the license.
Right.
Yeah, they
There's
don't take
tests.
responsibility.
Doesn't work that way. I also have this problem. Does not work that way.
There are
really
those
is a
tests.
terrible feeling for a child to know that a parent is in danger, or could endanger somebody else, and you're very limited with what you can do.
Right. But I do believe that there are tests that you
She's
can.
not interested in having the person come to the house. We spoke to the person who would be willing to offer a fee, but it's a minimal fee. Who cares, right? Willing to come, give them the test, but she doesn't want.
So have you tried to sort of ask them what they would be interested in accepting in terms of help?
I mean, I'm taking day by day. Everything's basically okay. They must do.
So they're not ready to
She's a
let
murderer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she's calling me cruel for wanting to take care of her.
So this is really, you're really kind of showing us how this conflict can be at its worst when there's no communication, when the two sides see things completely differently and there's no common ground to kind of understand what the needs are and how we can fill them.
The difference is that I'm right and she's wrong.
I'm sure they feel the same way too.
Your father, one thing that he's holding on is that he's in control of the project.
I wouldn't care so much if he'd be the one in charge of it, but she's encouraging him also.
But there is the mini.
But I want to shift I want to shift a little bit the focus here to the other side, because a lot of what we're talking about now feels a little bit like it's things that are out of our control. Other people behaving crazy, other people not. And usually, even in therapy, I always say, let's try to think about what we can do, because other people we can change, we can make them less crazy, we can, what I want to say in terms of enlisting resources is that it's also a struggle, I think, for the primary caregiver, how much we let in. And we're having this discussion in the previous session that just left, that there's really a lot of privileges that come with being the primary caregiver. There's a lot of control involved, right? You're in control. Your identity becomes as the primary caregiver. You get to make a lot of the choices. There's a lot of pride and good feelings that come out of that position as well. A lot of autonomy.
I don't find it pride. It's
not in a bad way, but pride as in taking pride for doing the right thing, for taking care of your loved one.
Every decision is a major quote.
Sure. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying that there's the privileges that come with it, or the sort of the things that make it worthwhile.
It's part of life.
Sure, right.
It's part of life.
You're put in this. You didn't sign up for it. But I think sometimes when we're in that position, it becomes part of your identity as a caregiver. It becomes part of, and then kind of decentralizing it and bringing other people in can sometimes feel like, I know better how to do this, so why would I now leave for 2 hours and let my sister do this when I know that I could do it better, which is true, you could do it better. But there's a trade-off here, and the trade-off is that if you're feeling overwhelmed and if it feels like you no longer have a life, then you may need to sometimes lower the standards of the care or give up a little bit of the doing things the way you think that they should be done in order to get some of your life back. So I just want you to think, each one of you, what are the roadblocks? What are the things that get in the way for you of enlisting more support from others, asking for help, bringing other people in? If there's anything you think that's getting in the way for you personally to do that.
It's my husband, so because it's my husband, I'm very careful. I don't want the children to see everything.
Right.
So yes, they offer, but I am not encouraged to a point. I don't let them come in because I don't want them to realize how bad Daddy really is. So yes, I'm overwhelmed. Again, my choice, but I realize it. But I don't want. I don't want.
Why? I would love to know my father's real condition.
They know his real condition, but certain things, they don't have.
Well, I think we have to be careful because I don't think it's the same kind of situation. So I wouldn't make that.
It's a dignity. It's a. I don't want them. If he goes to the store, I'll deal with it. I don't want them to have to. Daddy, come here, Daddy.
It's back to the dignity.
It's back to the dignity of my husband.
Right.
That
you
it's
don't
one
want.
thing if I see how bad it is, and it's another thing if his children see what's going on, and they do, and they see, and they're great, and they come. But I know I'm holding back because they don't have to see everything, and I know it's going to get worse, and that I will need more help.
So it's a balance. It's a balancing act between
my needs,
protecting his.
Still being the mother, protecting my children, my needs.
But when it comes to protecting the children, I really do want to bring that up because I think you're not alone in that conflict.
To what degree, right? To what degree do I? You see, my kids, the oldest is 32, and it happened 4 years ago, right? So he was a baby, and my baby is 21. So they're having children, they're starting their business and everything. They have their life.
Right.
And what happens is, like the first question I said, the hardest part is getting help when I need it. So I need the help if I want to go to a simcha. So what I'm learning now is to take aids, to get outside help so my kids could enjoy life.
Right.
That's what happens.
Yeah, so everybody has to find that balance that works for them. But I think sometimes this tendency to want to protect others, to shield them, is very well intentioned, and it comes from the maternal part in you, and it's valid of being a mother. But at the same time, I think sometimes that can take away from a few things from them.
Let
me tell you.
I call them for Shabbos and Supper, but they're not interested in coming. Because it's too hard for them to come, only when they need to have the rest.
Yeah, that's different. That's different than shielding them. Let's separate.
Right.
One thing is to say, this is what I need, and they might say yes or no. Right. And another thing is to say, I'm not going to ask for this because I don't want to burden them. I don't want them to know how bad things are. Okay? These are two kind of separate ways to go. Now, when you're trying to protect your children and you are doing the maternal thing, which is, these are your babies and you're shielding them, that's totally admirable, and I understand that. At the same time, you have to, again, balance it against the other thing. And let me tell you what happens in general with shielding. You're giving them something, but you're also taking away from them something. I'll tell you what you're taking away from them. You're taking away from them their free choice, they're adults, to say yes or no, okay? Because they don't know that this is a need. You're right, this may be too much for them, but you may be surprised to find out that they're adults who are very capable and willing, and when you're not giving them that choice, you're actually depriving them of making their own choices. You're also depriving them, possibly, from having a certain kind of relationship with this parent, which may never come back, okay? Because sometimes you may have to push them to come and to do these 2 hours because they don't want to originally. But in retrospect, after the crisis goes on, they may find that these 2 hours that they came to visit is actually the most meaningful time that they spent. It's the one thing that they hold on for dear life. It's the best memories they have, even if the father was in a compromised situation, even because it was real, because they were there for him when they needed him, and that's not going to come back. They're not going to get that chance again. So being that they're adults, and being that there's a balancing act here, that you also want to give them the free choice to choose for themselves, and you want to give them the gift of being able to give when they can, I think that also has to play out in that equation, even as you're thinking that you want to protect them and you don't want to overburden them. Okay, those are the sort of two aspects of it. Yes?
I think there's one piece I'm not sure that maybe she was alluding to. In addition to protecting your children, I can relate to the piece, I think, of protecting her husband's dignity. I know with my father, many times, all sorts of different involvements where I would try to protect him so that people wouldn't be aware of, how confused he was getting, and, reminding him who people were before I put him on the phone, and he used to give a shear and trying to help him get it together because he was starting to lose it. And there were so many situations where it was just wanting that person, the ill person, to have the dignity and to be viewed. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate that I think often people don't, when people become ill in this way, people don't no longer see them as the same person and no longer value them in the same way and respect them in the same way. And we're trying to protect the ill person.
But I think what you're also saying is that you're trying to protect the children from the reality of the loss that you're experiencing, because you're losing the person you used to know, okay? When somebody, my grandmother passed away from Alzheimer's, she was no longer the person she used to be. That's clear. I mean, and there's no way around it unless you put them in a room and lock the door. It's clear. I mean, it becomes clearer and clearer with every day that passes. This person is no longer who they used to be. So there's a tremendous loss that you have to really understand, that the person you're now caring for and loving is no longer the person you used to know. You still, of course, love them. Their neshama is the same. Your love for them is the same. But their personality, their cognitive capacity, their physiological, the body, nothing is the same. So you're dealing with that reality, right, as the primary caregiver. And at one point or another, I think anybody who's going to be involved with this person is going to have to process that loss as well and come to terms with it. I don't know that the outcome is necessarily losing respect for that person.
So one thing is wanting to protect, so what you're saying is wanting to protect the children from that feeling of loss for what their father has
used to be.
That's one thing. But another, like a little slant on it, is wanting to protect the sick person's dignity and wanting, it's very controlling, but wanting
it's
to
kind
not,
of right.
not have other people view them
right. The trouble with that, the trouble with that is a little bit that we're kind of projecting a little bit, or assuming that that's what they would want. I don't know if the person you're caring for, sometimes it's physiological and they're completely there, so you can ask them, what would bother you, and I'm not talking about toileting or these kind of things, but more, so sometimes you can ask them, but other times they're not all there to answer the question, and then it's a question of how much of it is a projection of kind of what you know what I mean?
It could be there's some projection there, but I do see, like with my father's grandchildren, like they were a little bit younger when he was fine, and now they don't, like, his children, feel like he was the most amazing man, but his grandchildren don't remember seeing him.
So children is different. It's really, I think it's important for us also to draw the line that when you're dealing with children is very much different than when you're dealing with adults, only because their capacity to process is so much different that for a child it's impossible to put everything together, whereas for an adult has the capacity to say, my father was a great man, and now this terrible thing is happening to him, and I can separate the two. It doesn't, invalidate.
I have a friend whose mom had Alzheimer's, and she said, I lost my mother 10 years ago, 9 years ago.
Right.
So I know I'm with my mother, I'm in her home, I'm dealing with who she is right now, and I'm always struggling to remember who she was before to keep that in
memory.
Mind, because I'm dealing with this new person on a daily basis.
Right. So that's part of the loss that's happening even before we lose the person, and it's part of the losses that whoever is involved in the caregiving have to be exposed to in order to be able to be a caregiver.
It's a lifetime struggle to come to terms.
Yeah.
But you were saying controlling. When you're a caretaker, that you feel empowered, you have to let go. But it takes a while. It's 4 years. And I know it's hard for my kids to come all the time. So I said, listen, you can't come Hanukkah to me. Whoever wants, I come to them. I'm starting to be more flexible, more easy, but it takes a time to adjust. And also each situation is different, and not everybody can handle it. But the hardest part is for a parent is that when you're a couple and you make decisions, your kids don't look at you, daddy did it or mommy did it, because it's my parents decided.
Right.
So there's no issue like one person, and it's very hard that I am the caretaker. I have to make financial decisions. I have to decide on everything. So sometimes I make mistakes. I say the wrong thing. I don't have the patience or what, but the kids don't want to see that I had a 3-hour hectic morning dressing him, getting him ready, doing therapy, having him eat, get ready for the time schedule, the age to come to take him to school. And they call me up at 9:30, and if I'm just like overwhelmed and I'm not concentrating, they feel like I should they don't say it, but actually talk more than words. It is very hard on the parents. And so children have to think of the parents, whoever is taking care of, they have their issues, and they don't mean to hurt the children.
Absolutely.
You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So
and
your
I
issue
think
with the car is a very, a dangerous thing, but also your mother, stepmother, and your father, whatever, they have a lot of issues to deal with every day.
So I think that we're going back to...
It's very, very hard because I am dealing with him. He has hours and days, he's so good. And then he has hours and he'll ask me, who are you? You know?
Right.
And
are your children aware that that's what you're going through?
My kids are treating him to the point the last 2 months as if he doesn't know what's coming and going. And it's so hurting because he does. He can't process his thoughts. And I try to make him as happy and safe as could be, keep him busy. I have my days.
But I think you really are touching on, you really hit it on the nail, that it's a process and it's something that you kind of learn how to collaborate with people and how to
children
find.
have to accept parents. I'm on the other end. I was on the other end as well.
Sure.
Because my father was with Parkinson's for 29 years and he was nifted 10 years ago and I was 16 and a half when it happened. I was a 10th grader. No, I was 11th grader then. So I know which sides it is.
I know which side.
And I really
if
feel
we
that
were
there's
doing
a lot of children here. Think of the spouse, the parent that's taking care. I don't like pity. That's one thing. Maybe that's why I'm surviving. I don't like pity and I like to be done. But I feel that because I'm surviving and I'm coming across like world is
like
great,
everything is okay.
I look like as a,
so
what
if
happens
so
is everybody feels like they want to offer the help and you're not accepting it.
So if
I'm sure you have it with
so if this was family therapy and he was the son and you were the mother, this is what we would be doing, right? You would be telling him about your struggles, about how this is so hard for you, and he would be telling you about his yearning to be let in, to know more what's going on so that he can find his place in this equation. Where can he fit in? How can he be included? Because he doesn't want to live with regrets later down the road that he hasn't done enough for his father. So I think that's the kind of family meetings that I'm talking about, that are not necessarily accusations, you're not doing enough, you're not letting me, but more about sharing your experience with the other person because they may not know what you're going through, sharing it with your children, sharing it with your siblings, letting them know how overwhelming it is, letting them in. Is there anything, because we're going to end in a few minutes, and I was going to end with a little bit of this mindfulness, which I think is helpful.
I have a question. How do you get people to open up to want to have the conversation? He has a very difficult situation.
Yes, he does. And it's
his stepmother doesn't want to hear from him.
Right. So but most of the time, situations are not that extreme.
Like if there's a caregiver, right? There's a caregiver, and there's a sister that is called upon only when the caregiver, there's an aide in the house, 24 hours a day, 5.5 days a week. The sister is the main caregiver. She's the supervising caregiver. She only calls for help when she gets super frustrated, and she says, "I can't take it anymore. You got to come. You're living in a different section. You got to come." Okay. Instead of having a conversation, it'll never happen because the main caregiver believes that she is in control, and the other person is the outsider.
And she is.
She is in control, but she'll never be open for conversation.
Well, she's going to be open for conversations in these moments when she's overwhelmed and when she's frustrated, when she needs you to come in.
She'll ask for help then, but she will never be open for conversation. That's right. She's calling and saying, "You're not doing anything for mom."
So those are, I think those are opportunities. Those are opportunities to say, you know, I would like to help more actually, and I really want to hear from you. What do you need? Can we meet and talk about what is it like for you? Can we have a conversation about it?
It's not going to help. If your next door neighbors is one thing, but if you're in another section You know, somebody's in Staten Island, somebody's in Long Island, somebody's in Brooklyn, and somebody's in Staten Island.
You feel that you don't have any bargaining power.
Especially not after 3-4 years of being in charge. That person is in charge.
But I think as we go around the room and we hear from people how overwhelming it is, I think that person who is in charge, who is feeling that sense of being overwhelmed and who maybe is sitting in a workshop like this, maybe or maybe not, might come to a place and a time where they themselves feel that they can't do it by themselves anymore. That if these type of situations come up more and more, they may realize that they need more help, and that's really your opportunity to come in, assuming that you haven't accumulated so much resentment and anger that at that point maybe you're also, you're having...
But it's not as part of this conversation, it's a demand. I need your help today.
What if they don't give you help? They say to you, oh, well, you know what, you can't take care of your mother, whatever. Put her in a home. Put her, that's the answer.
Right, that's not
an answer.
No, that's not helpful. That is not helpful for you.
I take care of her 24/7. If I ask for like comments or whatever,
Your sister,
my
whoever
sister
it
will
is.
say, oh, you have to send me
The main
somewhere
caregiver,
because I'm taking
tell
care
her
of
to
her.
first, well, I don't want to
Then
come
both
to
the
this
Shabbos comes, oh, you have to take her back home.
Right, so you don't...
I think it's 24/7, I'm asking for one night. That's her personality. That's not an answer.
Right, that's not an answer for you. That's not what... Right, of course. Of course.
Myra was 5 minutes downstairs.
Okay.
Followed again after the
The flip side of it is
Myra was 5 minutes.
We're gonna have guys, just less than 5 minutes.
I just wanted to give the flip side. My father just in the summer moved in with me. Right? But I have 4 brothers within a 5 minutes from me. Now my brother, where my father used to live in Brooklyn, was one brother living there, and he was, as one of my brothers described him after a couple of days with my father, as a mellow. He took care of whatever it was. But it's not like I'm taking control. We've really divided it. He's living in my house.
But you divided the responsibilities.
My brothers all have the combination to my house to come visit my father at any time, and they do. They come on all different times of the day, and it's not. I'm saying it's not like mother-in-law.
But I just want to add one more thing. Right, it's not always
to be in my house. But this past shop is my brother.
You have siblings. You want that. Everybody has a job.
I just wanna wrap up, but I do wanna say that when the family doesn't step in, there is other resources as well. Okay, there are a lot of ways that you can reach out, and I think if I can make a suggestion is to not get despondent because your siblings are not cooperating. To not say, if my siblings are not helping, then forget about it. Nobody is going to. Shuls, rabbis, organizations, there's a lot of resources out there, and if you have that willingness in you to bring in more people, you will find a way. If you make that a priority, then you will find a way to do it. Okay? I mean, there's other workshops here who will give... Here, if you want to write down the name of this book, at the back of it, it has a lot of resources, including websites, support groups, okay? The title is The Emotional Survival Guide for Caregivers, and it's a very nice... it kind of takes you through all the steps, but it also gives you a lot of practical support. Websites, support groups, just a lot... Barry Jacobs. Barry Jacobs. You can come here to the front and take a look at it. Thank you so much.
Dr. Lowinger will stay for another 5-10 minutes for questions, and everyone should go to the main ballroom for the provider and the main event.
You were very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
I have a slightly different problem. My mother suffered a stroke 11 years ago. She's been in my house since.
Thank you for coming.
I have a daughter, she's 13 now. She was 2 when my mother moved in. And my mother hates her. She just hates her. She yells at her when she sees her. This child is amazing. Every time she needs something, she keeps trying and keeps trying. But I don't know what to do. Like, how do I get her to like her?
Thank you very much. How do you get her to like her? That's a good question.
But I think if you do this again, you should really start it on this course, because this wasn't meant to be group therapy for people who were regulars at their siblings.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your feedback. Thank you for representing that part of it. You were definitely a positive beacon in here. That was very good.
It's not realistic, unfortunately.
What do you do with
just 1 second. I think they were, yeah, I do actually. Because I really didn't cover a lot of it. I hope it was. Okay, thank you.
You have my bag.
You know, I think with teenagers, honestly, at this point, it's very hard because it's such a sensitive time. You don't want to force it too much, okay? Because
it's not her. It's my mother.
I know, but if you're forcing it too much and it doesn't end up well, it can actually have worse outcomes than just accepting that they are not the best friends right now. Only because as a teenager, kids tend to backlash from one extreme to the other, and if she feels that she's trying so hard and she's being rejected, that might be worse than explaining to her, look, grandma is not all there. If she was, she would be crazy about you, and just to try to explain to your daughter, rather, instead of forcing it, to try to explain to her, to educate her, to really try to make it clear to her that it's not about her, it's not personal. You don't want her to have this chip on her shoulders that there's something about her that she's doing this, but rather to explain to her that it's not her problem. She's doing all the right things. She's wonderful, and unfortunately, your grandmother is not all. You know, her grandmother is not there. She's not well. She can't pull it off right now.
Okay.
I mean, that would be my gut feeling. That's how I would go about it.
Thank you so much.
Okay? You're very welcome. Thank you.
It's really, really good.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Thank you. Yes. I specialize in trauma, bereavement, grief, family work. Yeah.
What do you do with a patient? That's my husband I'm talking about. He doesn't want to have an aid. Not that he doesn't know what he wants, but he tells them to go home. And I know how to cross myself. But he gets lost when he goes himself. But he refuses to have anybody stamp. If he stays in the house, either when he goes to Dublin, he'll go with him and come back with him. But he doesn't want him to sit in the house. He doesn't need anybody. He doesn't want.
He refuses the.
Yeah. What is
I mean, it's common, but I don't think you can go along with that, right? Because that's not realistic. You're looking out ultimately
for. I'm trying to send them away as much as I can, but it's very hard on me.
I don't think that that's a solution in the long run. I think that if you need the aid, you need the aid, and I mean, unfortunately, this is not the first time. Aides know how to deal with this. I've been in situations where the person will say bullshit and go away and all this stuff, and they have to be tough and to learn how to deal with it. I don't think that it's.
But it's not the end. Afterwards, he calls me into a separate room and he yells at me. Why did it's such issues from you? Why do you call somebody? I don't need.
What does he suffer from? Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's.
Yeah. So you have to realize, first of all, that there's personality changes that are going on. That the person who is talking to you now is not your husband. Thank you very much. Who used to be that you used to know. So that voice that is coming at you is not a representation of who he is.
It's not that I get insulted.
You can't take it personally.
It doesn't feel good. I'm not going to say it feels good, but I don't get insulted. But I don't know.
But you cannot take that to be coming from a rational, reasonable person. You can't take it at face value. You cannot treat it.
So what am I supposed to do?
You say yes, and you do what you have to do. You have to do what you have to do. Absolutely, you can. And you can't walk around. Yes, and you can't walk around feeling guilty or bad about it, because you know what? This is very hard, and you're doing the best thing you can do. And without this aid, you wouldn't be able to have him in the house, and then he would be in a nursing home, which eventually maybe will have to happen anyways.
I'm starting to think about that already, because sometimes I just feel it's impossible.
And then maybe at some point that's the next thing to consider. If it gets to be so hard and there's so much conflict, sometimes they even become aggressive physically, and then it's time to make a plan.
Sometimes he doesn't know me. He asks me, "V's mommy?" You know, he's looking at me, "V's mommy?" Or,
so I
heard what the doctor said downstairs. We give many times medication for the patient because the caretaker should cope in life, and the caretaker should be able to cope. And sometimes, if you can't cope, you are not going to become sick because of him. We have to watch you because he has.
There might be medication. Right? Absolutely. I think there's also medication. Maybe he suffers at this point from personality changes and depression and anxiety. There's medications that can sedate him a little bit. I think you should discuss that with his GP. Maybe he needs a little bit more.
And if you feel you can't talk to this doctor,
maybe he needs a little bit more.
Another doctor till you find the right.
You have to find somebody that works for you.
Go to a neurologist. The Mount Sinai is supposed to be excellent.
But I really think that you, first of all, you need to do what, you know, you are the head now. Unfortunately, so you need to make decisions that make sense from a rational point of view. I know that sometimes can come across as if they know what they're talking about, but they are not all there.
He comes home. When gaat Michelle home? You understand Yiddish? No. You want to go home. When are we going home? Why are we here? Are you enjoying yourself here? Let's go home. I can't be here anymore. Let's go home. When it was to answer.
You say yes, we're going home. So you always have